shows up, he can sit on the edge.
And he'll be here.
I hope so, because I put his name on the slide.
Yes.
I need you to fire up this computer and test it. I need some audio out of it. Keep it blare pretty loud, but
Gee. Did you test the volume?
can't. You gotta turn it on.
No password.
I don't mess with people's computers.
I have permission for.
I have a rule on that one. That ends up badly. There you go.
All right.
Mic. You can push some audio out of it.
Can you see that?
Perfect.
This is the wrong resolution for me, though.
Okay, what you need to do is go into your thing, hold down the option key on your tech screen, and you can pick a resolution. Displays,
Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4.
displays. There, go like 720p.
Testing. Lou?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
That's good.
You never hit a microphone, you always do this. All right, never hit a microphone. All right,
Never hit it. I was about to hit it.
boom! They've never hit it this year.
Tell me about it.
Anyway,
Is Stephen here? Have you seen
Alan
him?
is
I haven't
just
seen
outside.
it.
He's still
In fact, I
No, no.
talked about
the
it.
TV does have a headphone out right here.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So we still gotta go into this mixer somewhere.
What a cool moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so you
Was that loud enough? I think it could be louder.
Go to,
You guys hear
go to
that?
the sound.
What?
Go to,
It should be louder, it sounds like.
just, preferences, sound.
Yeah,
No,
we
no,
got a
no,
maximum
no,
volume on
just
that
go to the
side.
wrong place. Just go into your speakers instead of this.
Oh, let's fix that.
Well, we go to the speakers,
Yes.
so we could
Preferences,
use this to...
Where
sound,
do I go now?
sound is second row, far right. Sound, click, output, top of the screen. Then you're gonna go, send it to the Sony TV.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, did you get that t-shirt here, sir?
No.
Okay, awesome shirt. Shameless plug, we'll be talking about Corey Ackerman in my panel, which is after this one.
Oh.
Never met Al Feldstein, never. I think it's about time that
Wow, that's loud.
Here now.
Now
Did you guys hear that?
Yeah.
In the next
Did
room.
anybody hear that at all?
Can you hear anything after that?
Huh?
I think the hotel's getting complaints from upstairs.
Now I got no sound.
Wait, he's mix it, he's trying to mix it. If it doesn't work, we can just use this. It's fine. On your side.
All right, that puts us down to the speakers.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's a good idea. I think we're set. Search your mic and you're done. These two don't have on-off supposed to be.
There's a couple of doctors.
We don't have
Oh,
on.
that's a guy.
That's not ours.
That's don't put it in anything that breaks stuff.
Only we're clean to get here, we're starting. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Can everybody, Tom, you want to test?
Batter up.
Testing. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay,
All panels, a little testing this one.
that's right, we're a bunch of testy guys.
All right, looks like you're in business.
Let me just get this thing started. Well, good morning, everyone. Morning. Thank you for coming. I've got some really great stuff to share with you today, including the video clip, which you sort of saw a minute ago, but it's a very important moment in comics history. So I hope you'll all stick around to see that at the end. My name is Mike Catron. I'm the editor of the Fantagraphics EC Artists Library. We're doing the EC library by artists. So we'll have a book of Wally Wood, we'll have a book of Jack Kamen, a book of Al Williamson, and so on and so on. And we've got about, I think I've done 29 of them. I think 27 or 28 are out at this point. And we have a bunch more to go. So if you're following those, I thank you for that. We put a lot of effort into it, and cleaning stuff up that has not been properly reproduced before and all that kind of stuff. So we're here to talk today about Ray Bradbury and the stories that he had adapted at EC, including ones he didn't know about. And we're going to get into that. I'd like to introduce Orty, or I'll tell you what, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi. My name is Orty Ortwine. That is my real name, incidentally. And I'm a volunteer for the Ray Bradbury Experience Museum. And shameless plug, I've got little cheap flyers that you can grab if you want to get more information about that online, and we can talk about that later too. So, yep.
And Tommy?
And I'm Tommy Burns. I'm the founding admin of the EC Fan Addict Club on Facebook since 2013. 6,500 members and counting. So if you haven't checked this out, please do. And I also am currently writing the introductions for the Fantagraphics EC Library collections that Mike just talked about.
Right. Very good. Okay. Well, we may or may not be joined by our friend Steve Ringenberg. Well, let's get right to it. Now, first of all, I just want to say welcome. This is a dinosaur drawing by Wallace Wood. I know we all call him Wally. He actually did prefer Wallace, so I try to remember to call him Wallace, but it's a hard lifetime habit to break. But this is a painting he did that's been rarely seen. It has no particular relevance to Ray Bradbury. I just happen to like it. We used it as the cover of the Life and Legend of Wallace Wood, Volume 1. So that's just there because I like dinosaurs. And by the way, so did Ray. So we're going to talk about Ray Bradbury's EC years, which were from 1951 to 1954, when his stories were being adapted by basically all of the EC artists. I think just about everybody got at least one, including Ingalls. And this is a biography that EC ran of Ray. This one ran on the inside cover of Shock Suspense Stories number 19. And there he is, a youthful Ray. Some of us who got to know him don't remember him that young, but there he is. Is it number 9? Thank you. Oh, that's right. Sorry. Well, that's why you're here. And there's the photo that they used in that bio. They did that for all of their artists who were at the company at the time. Ray's the only one who was just strictly a writer, and he didn't actually write any scripts. They were just adapting his stories. We're going to get into that in a minute. Now, so this is the official list of stories that were adapted into EC Comics. This is the Ray Bradbury Index. It's from Tales of Terror, which was a co-publication with Fantagraphics involved. That's the official list. Now, there's the book also identifies a few stories that have strong similarities but aren't considered adaptations. So if you include those, that count comes to 30. And this is just a closer look up at some of the stuff. You can see the splash pages there for the Screaming Woman and There Will Come Soft Rains, which we're going to talk about. And there's a few more. And I'd like to start off talking about an adaptation called Home to Stay. And you'll see I've given the credits here. It says story by Ray Bradbury, a script by Al Feldstein. I probably should have said stories by Ray Bradbury, because this was actually a combination of 2 stories. And we'll get into a little bit about how they did their work at EC. It helps for you to understand what happens next if you know what came before. And what came before was every morning, Monday through Thursday, EC publisher Bill Gaines and editor Al Feldstein would have a story conference. And Gaines would come in with some ideas that he had, sometimes written on little scraps of paper, and said, I've got some ideas for some stories for some of the magazines. And so he and Al Feldstein would kind of hash that out. And by the end of their conference, they would have a plot figured out. And then Al would go off to his office cubicle or wherever he could find a place to work, especially in the early days. And he would write a story. And by 5 o'clock, I guess, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, by the end of the day,
Late afternoon, yeah.
yeah, by the end of the
Story
day,
time.
he would have a completed story based on the conversation they had in the morning. And so Al wasn't always aware of where Bill was getting these ideas. He called them springboards. They just had a conversation, they worked something out, they were relatively happy about it, so on. So let's talk a little bit about Home to Stay. Now this appeared in, I have it as May, June 1952, is that right? Weird Fantasy 13?
I think that's right, Weird Fantasy 13 with the giant Mars on the cover.
Yeah, okay. Before we get into the story itself, I found this little, I thought this was fascinating. This is Marie Severin's color guide, which would be given to the printer for the printer to put in the color. Wallace Wood would have drawn the whole story in, in black ink, no color, maybe some zipatone, and so then they would make what they call a silver print, and then she would take Dr. Martin's dyes and indicate on it what should be what color.
And she actually hand-colored this, so
Right,
she would take these silver prints, were on porous paper, black and white, same size as the comics, she'd color them in, write the color codes, and then they would go to chemical engravers who would do the color separations. That's very cool to see.
Yeah, and this code that you see, like you see Y, I can't point to it over here, Y3B2 and YR and B3 and B2 and all those designations. I can tell you what they mean, but it's really not important. What's significant about it is this is the only, it was only used for comics. It was their own sort of secret comic book coloring code that no other printing business used. It was only for comics. I knew the guy who invented it. This is a close-up look at one of the panels. And you'll notice that because he's using zipatone there in the foreground in front of the pool, that she indicates no color, because if you try to print ink over black ink, which is what the zipatone translates to when it's printed, you get this kind of muddy yuck, and so it's better just to leave that alone. And obviously Wood wanted it that way, so that's what we got. So here's the story, Home to Stay. It's drawn by Wallace Wood, and this is page 1. Tommy, you want to jump in here and talk a little bit about it?
Well, yeah, so Home to Stay, obviously, if you're a Bradbury aficionado, you don't know that story title, because as Mike said, Gaines would stay up all night. He was an insomniac, and he would be kind of hopped up on diet pills, reading pulps all night and getting story ideas. He'd read short story collections. And so Home to Stay is actually a combination of 2 stories by Bradbury, Kaleidoscope and Rocket Man. And the reason they're kind of mishmashed up together is because when he would pass these ideas, and as Mike said, sometimes on a scrap of paper, he'd just jot down a few ideas based on a story he had read, and he'd give it to Al. And Al didn't always know where these springboards came from, but sometimes they would spring from recognizable sources. And that was the case here. There's some very, very close similarities in the plot to Kaleidoscope and Rocket Man under the catch-all title of Home to Stay. So Gaines passed these ideas to Al, and after a night of binge reading, he might not have even remembered exactly where he got the ideas. So they mixed them up together, produced this story, and though it's unofficial as of yet, it's recognized as one of the greatest of the Bradbury adaptations. Wood's art is fantastic, and the adaptation it's actually, the stories mixed together work very well.
And it's kind of a domestic story. It's a science fiction story, but there's a very strong domestic element to it. Artie, do you have anything?
Oh, I was just gonna add, I won't give it away, but the way this comic ends and the way the story Kaleidoscope ends really seals it as far as an unauthorized adaptation. There's no way it can be a coincidence. It's, and again, and if you haven't read the story, read it. It's awesome. But the ending, especially, is what makes it there's no way it can be a coincidence.
Well, if you don't like spoilers, you should leave, because I'm going to be doing spoilers all day long.
Okay.
All right. So
You can have a signal where you cover your ears.
No, there's no chance. There's no chance. So here we are. This is, as you saw on the previous page, it was a woman and her son. And on this page, we establish that his father is a rocket man. And so he's like a sailor, he goes off for long stretches of time. And so you can see in the last panel here on this page that, he's playing with his son, showing a model rocket ship. And the boy is just, enamored with his father. And as we will see, he misses him a lot. And so there's a lot of domestic stuff here, which is kind of unusual for an EC science fiction story. So there's a lot of establishing of the situation and the characters, and the boys in the last panel, saying, please hang around. Everybody thinks I don't even have a daddy anymore. And so that's kind of a little tugging at the heartstrings. And here on this page, we've got some domestic situations between the wife and the husband. Again, building this up. And again, it's all, we're on page, 4 now? And well, we've seen the toy rocket ship, and it's all, domestic. But you can see in the last panel, we're getting ready to go to the rocket port there. We say goodbye. And off, they're in the second tier, the last panel in the second tier, the father launches. The ship he's in launches. And then, so now the son and the mother are alone. And he's playing with the rocket ships because, it reminds him of his father, it makes a connection. And then they I don't even know if they got out of orbit, I don't think they did. Something goes wrong. And the father is ejected from the ship. You see the ship blows up. But he doesn't have any means of getting back to the ship or getting to another ship. And I don't know how well you can see it on the screen. But what happens is, and this reminds me, by the way, of an Asimov story. He ends up falling into the atmosphere and burning up on re-entry. And they happen to see it, and they say, "Oh, look, Mom, a shooting star." And she says, "Make a wish." And he says, I wish Daddy would come home to stay tonight," which, of course, he has just done.
And it's interesting, I mean, you mentioned the domestic situation and the sentimental nature of it. And those guys at EC, by and large, had sentimental streaks a mile wide, and they really could tug at the heartstrings. And this story, it's a blending of Bradbury stories, but it's also one of the most successful initial blendings of EC's talents and Ray Bradbury's storytelling. Also, tendency towards the very sentimental. So Bradbury could take feelings you had, whether they were wistful or nostalgic, or things you only knew as feelings, and he could put them into words. And Feldstein had kind of dabbled in that with comic books. So it was really almost a beautiful marriage of talents, and it would only get better and better from here.
And I was just gonna add, Bradbury had no qualms about being described as sentimental either. He did not consider that an insult. He said when he was first getting critiqued, he didn't realize that when critics were calling him sentimental, it was meant to be a put down. He was completely proud of that. So and that's actually why he really liked this adaptation. And also, in case, just random trivia, Rocket Man is also where the Elton John song comes from. Elton John didn't write the lyrics for it, but that's where the inspiration came from.
Was a Bradbury?
Yeah. No, if you listen to it, 8
Right.
days a week and all that.
Right.
Was anyone not a Bradbury fan?
Exactly.
Yeah, if you're not a Bradbury fan, why are you here? But anyway, so this is one of the, I think one of the better adaptations, even though Bradbury didn't know about it at the time. As I say, if you're a Bradbury collector, the only place you can get this Bradbury story is in this issue of Weird Fantasy, or of course one of the places that's been reprinted, among which are the books that I work on. Now, the thing of it was, Bradbury liked comics, and some friends of him said, "Hey, this looks an awful like one of your stories," and he got himself a copy, and he wrote Bill Gaines a letter. And this is a very famous letter in EC lore. You can see it's dated April 19th, 1952. And I'm just going to read this part to you. "Just a note to remind you," this is addressed to Bill Gaines, who was the publisher. "Just a note to remind you of an oversight. You have not as yet sent on the check for $50 to cover the use of secondary rights on my 2 stories, The Rocket Man and Kaleidoscope, which appeared in your Weird Fantasy May-June 1952 number 13 issue, with the overall title of Home to Stay. I feel this was probably overlooked in the general confusion of office work,
Such a gentleman.
and look forward to your payment in the near future. My very best wishes to you, yours cordially, Ray Bradbury." So Gaines knew he'd been caught flat-footed ripping this guy's work off. And you know, you might think that this is the an excuse to somebody to file a lawsuit and get it on a high dudgeon and stuff.
Yeah.
But Bradbury's diplomatic approach to this led to a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. And I also want to point out the PS, because not one to turn down an opportunity, Bradbury further went on to say, have you ever considered doing an entire issue of your magazine based on my stories? And that was in his PS. And so he made the suggestion to Gaines, and not only did he need $50, but that he might want to pursue more Bradbury stuff, which is very smart on Bradbury's part, I think.
Yeah, and this was like way before there was such a thing as graphic novels, and that's basically what he's talking about here, like an entire comic book adaptation of a book. So that was a very new concept at that time.
So there's the famous letter. I couldn't see it from the side, but I can now. So I want to talk about one of my favorites as well. I mean, I got a lot of favorites, but this is another Wallace Wood story, so it's kind of unfair because there's so many other artists we can talk about, and we only have so much time. But I do want to do this one. This is There Will Come Soft Rains, and it's also adapted by Wallace Wood. But this was an official adaptation, so you can see they put Bradbury's name right there on the splash pad. And I don't know, I guess I shouldn't assume everybody knows what There Will Come Soft Rains, but you take a look at the very first panel and it sort of sets the mood, because you see the silhouettes of people going about their daily lives. And there's no explanation given for it exactly. Is there an explanation? I don't think there is.
I mean, it's implied that it's
Yeah.
it's nuclear war, but they don't actually flat out
They
say
don't
it.
spell it out.
They don't spell it out.
Yeah.
You just see the aftermath.
And so, this is all in TikTok. It's 7 o'clock, time to do this. And TikTok, it's 10 o'clock, it's time to do this. And you hear these announcements that the House is making because it's part of the House's normal routine in this, near future, I guess. And again, we see all the routines that we go through in our daily lives and how we've automated them so much, as we're about to do with AI and in our own personal futures, I think. So you see, the car and the laundry and the dishes, and then we've got these little mousy things that run around and clean the carpets and do all that kind of stuff. And then we see the first living thing, and I think it's the last living thing in the story, and that's this poor starving dog. I think it is the only living thing. And he comes in, and you can see that Wood's drawn him here. He says scrawny, and you can see his bones.